What broke your heart completely? Story 1. My grandmother raised me. My dad died of a sudden heart attack when I was 8. My mom never got over it, started drinking, so my grandmother, who was 74 at the time, took over to care for me and my little brother. She broke her hip when she was in her late 90s and she had to be put in a nursing home. I would go visit her. By then she had started living in the past. She knew me, but she thought I was still in school and would ask why my brother wasn't home, what we wanted for supper, things like that. One day I went to see her and didn't recognize me or know who I was, and didn't speak. That was the most heartbreaking, gut-wrenching day of my life. That broke me. Completely. I went to my car and cried like a baby for a long time. She died at the age of 103, but that was the day I lost her. I didn't cry at her funeral. Story 2. I cared for my brother for 3 years who had end-stage renal failure. He was a non-compliant patient and I often had to be on him to eat right, take his meds, bathe. After a while, I had to clean him up when he soiled himself, take him to the hospital several times a week and transport him to dialysis. In the end, I had to lift him from the floor when he fell, which was often. One day while lifting him, I heard a pop and immediately felt excruciating pain. I had developed a microfracture in him from overexertion. The next time he fell, I implored EMS to help him. I had no choice. When I visited, he begged me to bring him home, but I couldn't. It broke my heart to hear him beg to leave. He passed away 8 months after he arrived. I couldn't even speak for a week. Story 3. 2 things. Losing my dad suddenly to a heart attack less than a month before my 21st birthday. I completely missed the chance to bond and develop an adult relationship with my dad. After that, I made sure that I really treasured and built a strong relationship with my mother. We were already best friends, but I didn't take her for granted anymore. I'd go over for lunch or dinner 1 to 2 times a week, and we'd have endless laughs, and I'd always tell her how much I loved and appreciated her. 2 months out from my 29th birthday, my mom suddenly died, a stroke. This hit me hard. To lose my main pillar of strength in my life was an emotional blow I still haven't recovered from. Since then, I've inherited and managed to buy my own place. A wonderful advantage at 31. But inside, I have never felt more hollow. If it weren't for my wonderful fiancé, I would honestly question the point in going on. She is the kindest person I know and is a big part of my motivation for continuing and excelling in life. I used to be such a completely joyful and unbridled personality, completely insulated from the harm that life can bring upon you. I miss that version of me. I'm still a good person. I still extract joy from a lot of what I do in life, but I still feel like parts of me died along with my parents. Story 4. I married my college sweetheart after dating for 5 years through college. Then, 6 months later, she had an affair with me. The affair lasted 8 months before I discovered it was happening. My life fell to pieces. Then I decided to change things. I left the US and moved abroad. After living in a foreign country for 2 years, I met a woman. We fell in love, and she was the thread that kept me sane and connected to society. After her and I were married, I discovered my mother was going through cancer back in the States. It was also during COVID, which meant traveling was near impossible. Not to mention that I was unable to afford being able to travel. I could not afford to leave my wife behind and quit my job. Then, the next summer, I discovered my wife was having an affair with a businessman in Singapore. This crushed me to a point where I don't like to be around people. Currently, my life is good. I spent some very difficult alone time hiking 3,500 kilometers through mountains along the east coast of the US. In that alone time, I learned more about myself than I've ever known. I also dealt with my demons. I'm still very much an introvert and prefer being alone, but I have a good wife now. She's incredibly talented. She deserves to have a man who is not broken and loves her unconditionally. I'm not that man yet, but I'm doing everything I can to become that man. The biggest lesson I learned is the things that make life difficult are stepping stones that lead to other opportunities. I've also picked up a mantra that I say to myself during good times and bad times. Everything is as it should be. Story 5. My childhood best friend was very much like a brother to me. We were inseparable. When we entered high school, he tired of being compared to his older brothers by his parents and rebelled. One day his mom was dressing him down in front of me and then asked him why he couldn't be more like me. At that point, he began to distance himself from me until we just weren't spending any time together. When I was 25, I took a job out of the area, so I looked him up thinking that I might not ever see him again. He was happy to hear from me and invited me over. When I arrived, he and his friends were playing pool, getting drunk and giving each other tattoos. Realizing I no longer had anything in common with him, I stayed perhaps 5 minutes and left. 30 years later, I tracked him down. I was going to be in the area and asked if he wanted to meet for lunch. He was very happy to hear from me. He was married and had 2 adult children. We met for lunch, and despite the fact that he looked awful, the hard life he had lived due to a combination of bad luck and bad choices was evident. It was like we were kids again. The same sweet guy I palled around with, who at the time was more of a brother to me than my own brothers, reappeared. We vowed to be in each other's lives again. It was great to have him back. About a month later, one of his sisters called. He had gone out for a walk the night before and never returned. The next day, he was found dead in the parking lot of a nearby office complex. An autopsy and security footage from a camera told the story. He had stopped to get something out of his day pack when a lifetime of smoking finally caught up with him. He had a massive heart attack and died instantly. I cried on the phone with his sister for half an hour. I texted my wife, who was out shopping with our 2 kids, what happened. When they got home, my daughter found me and said she was sorry to hear about what happened. I thanked her. I figured I was over the initial grief of it all. I went into the kitchen to find my wife. She put her arms around me and told me how sorry she was about what happened. I just burst into tears. Growing up, he truly was my very best friend and more of a brother to me than my own brothers. I had a grandfather die, uncles and aunts, but I was expecting that and they weren't particularly close to me. My friend's death was the first time I lost someone truly close. That was in 2016 and I still think about him often. Story 6. My mom died when I was 15 after a 10-year battle with recurrent oral cancer. She never smoked a day in her life either, just got unlucky. Her death was incredibly painful. However, there was something that happened a couple of years prior that I think broke my heart first. Bit of backstory, my mom was a children's librarian. She also worked at a children's bookstore for a while. And one of her favorite parts of her job was getting to do story times for the kids where she'd read to them and they'd do activities she prepared, etc. For as long as I knew her, she'd read to me and my sister, sung us lullabies, and was always there for advice or encouragement, or any other reason we had for talking with her. Words are a very important part of my life, and were always central in my perception of her and the way she showed love. Then they had to remove her tongue. When she first told us, and once it had registered that I would likely never hear her voice again, I completely broke down. That said, she did still manage to speak some. I strongly believe there was nothing that could have stopped her from that, but it was nowhere close to how she could before. She actually made some audio recordings for us the night before her surgery. Personal messages, my favorite lullaby that she used to sing to me, and a couple of my and my sister's favorite picture books that she used to read for us. I still have them to this day, and I am forever grateful they exist. Story 7. My husband suffered a severe traumatic brain injury over 10 years ago. He was not at fault in any way. Our children were 8 and 10 years old at the time, and I was in my early 30s. After around 7 months in hospitals, I brought my husband home as a diagnosed minimally conscious state patient who requires around-the-clock care. While I do have nursing, it is not consistent, so I fill in several 12-hour shifts a week and have done so for 10 years. Our children are grown now. They are healthy and well-rounded adults, for which I am abundantly grateful. Losing my husband was the greatest heartache of my life so far. He is here, but not. He loved me deeply and fully, and we were best friends. I fully appreciated him in every way. He was in all ways my person, and I was his. Not one thing in my life has brought me so much happiness and joy as meeting him and falling in love. We would have been married for 13 years by the time he was injured, and while we are still technically married, it is hard to feel that way. Our relationship now is one of caregiver and patient. Our kids have moved out for work and college and to live their own lives, which I encourage because I have not wanted to drag their lives down with our tragedy. They need to build their own futures, and that has been my driving force from the moment the fog of initial shock lifted after my husband's injury. But god damn if I am not unhappy and sad. I am perpetually a small trigger from crying at any moment, and I was not a crier before this all happened. The unhappiness is now an integral part of me. Sadness is twisted into my core like bindweed around a willow. My 30s are long gone. He is fairly stable because he is cared for so well in his own home, so he will likely live another 10 years or longer, and that means my 40s will also be devoted to his care. I cannot put him into an institution because to do so would wreck me completely. The internal conflict of seeing my life go away day by day spent caring for his body, the years falling away to never be regained while also wanting to give him the best care possible, is something I cannot allow myself to think about. It is too painful. I still love this man so much. I miss. I feel guilt for even mourning my 30s. I feel guilty for being surprised by how much my face has aged. I am stuck in 2014 when the injury happened. I could write so much more, but this is already too long. Story 8. Lots of things. It breaks my heart that my husband is a hard worker and the most professional, loyal, and friendly person in the world, yet companies have their numbers and budgets, and him and thousands more like him in our age group go underpaid in society as a whole, while people a few years older can't even convert a PDF contribute nothing and get paid double or triple. My dad died when I was 14, before household computers and mobile phones were in everyone's houses and pockets. He was a quiet man, good at billiards, and liked golf and analog photography, and he probably would have loved the early days of eBay and Etsy, finding small but useful knickknacks here and there. He would have probably recorded so much if he had access to a smartphone. It was a long time ago, but I still grieve him and the life he could have had, and the memories we had and could have made as a family. We lived just outside the city, went to school, and worked in the city, but he was truly himself during the summer months when he helped Grandpa out on the farm. I wonder if he would have liked to be a farmer if he had had the opportunity. I also wish he knew that he had another daughter from before I was born. The mother moved away and didn't let him know that she was pregnant, and she subsequently gave the baby up for adoption. The family took the baby and lived in Germany, and she moved home to Canada when she was 18. I have a half-sister who's 10 years older than me, and she didn't get to find her biological mom and my dad until after he was gone. I only found out about her 2 years ago. I wish he had gotten the chance to meet her or be part of her life because I know with every fiber of my soul that he would have loved that baby girl so much. It breaks my heart that I try hard to be a functioning member of society and that society just doesn't seem to want me. In my 20s, I was too young. In my late 30s, I'm too old. Sexism and ageism are real when it comes to the job market. I also work my ass off to stay in shape, but the reality is that I have been both tiny and larger in my adulthood, and discrimination against large people is also real, especially in the job market because one is seen as lazy, plain and simple. If anyone knew that I kept a strict diet and workout routine, have undergone one of the longest and most thorough personal trainer educations in the Nordics, and that I still gained weight anyway, maybe they'd change their tune. But I know that on the inside, everyone thinks that it must be something I was doing wrong or that I was dishonest, counting my calories, counting macros. Going from big to small again, the words that come out of my mouth get heard and taken more seriously. I am also high functioning, so I am always trying my darndest to do things right in every aspect of life. It breaks my heart that two of the largest populations, men and women, are getting pitted against each other constantly in the media. In reality, the experiences of both men and women are so much more nuanced. Pitting any population against each other opens doors for strong opinions on any political spectrum, when in reality, we all need to be working together. Story 9. My parents. I love them both so much, and I want them to live the rest of their lives in peace and with their grandchildren around. It shatters my heart the way they've hurt my sister and themselves. In 2018, my mom called me and told me she thought being sad would kill her, and asked me to get her out. We did, and she'd been in assisted living since then. Dad's been sober. Our family was finally on the mend from a difficult decade involving alcoholism, mental illness, financial struggle, and a physically degenerative disease. Last year, she moved back in with him. Last week, she called me again saying he was going to kill her. This time, I couldn't go rescue her. I had to call the police, call my support system, tell them I love them, and return to my evening with my daughter. Hearing my sister's voice crack when I told her about the call, she's so strong and she's set boundaries and is prioritizing her life in a really impressive and beautiful way. But I know it's because they've broken her heart so much that she has nothing left to give them. It hurts me that she's hurt too. Story 10. I recently lost the light of my life to a closed pyometra. I don't even want to say the full word. She was my entire world. I brought up the possibility of pyometra to the vet twice over the last month, and they insisted it wasn't the problem. She was having back leg weakness for a while. Other than that, no signs. Still, I was always so worried about it, but I couldn't ever bear to put her through a spay because she had terrible separation anxiety. I just couldn't bear the thought of her being cut open. I was always so vigilant about pyometra. The fact that it slipped under my radar was the biggest middle finger from the universe, ever. After seemingly improving, she suddenly developed black, watery diarrhea. I rushed her to the nearest emergency vet, which was over an hour away. I called them first to make sure they could see her. I called again when I was on my way to them. Upon arrival, they told me they only had one doctor and couldn't see me. I couldn't believe it. I took her home that night and we slept together as we always did. She let out her little sighs and I got to enjoy one more normal night with her. The next morning, I rushed her to the nearest open vet. They told me she didn't look good. I pleaded with them to figure out what was wrong with my little girl. After spending all day in the vet and all sorts of other pointless tests, I insisted they perform an ultrasound. Sure enough, they determined she had pyometra. They quoted me $12,000 for the surgery. I did not have $12,000 and was not approved for care credit, so I couldn't proceed with the surgery. I felt so guilty, so helpless, and so sick. You should not have to have $12,000 saved up to save a dog's life. That is insane and completely sick. To lock a pet's potentially life-saving surgery behind a paywall is absolutely disgusting. There is a special place in hell for the people behind this system. After learning I couldn't afford the surgery, the doc came in and prescribed all sorts of antibiotics and said to take her home and give it a shot because my girl still had her strong appetite and was still eating. We agreed that if she deteriorated further, I would bring her back in to be put to sleep. The doctor filled me full of false hope to sell me medications, but did not give me any warning about how potentially painful a death it would be for my beloved dog. We get Serenity out to the car, and the first thing I do is start administering the antibiotics. She still had her appetite until we got her home and inside. She loved her food, and we always knew that the day she stopped eating would be her last. I got her home and settled in her favorite chair with me. From here, she declined so rapidly. I could not get her to take her meds, not even with food. Suddenly, she tried standing, and all of a sudden, all the pus started pouring out. I was absolutely horrified, but I at first thought it may have been a good thing, as maybe her cervix had opened, allowing the pus to drain. This was not the case. As it turns out, her uterus burst while in my lap. She went into septic shock, began having very violent seizures, and within 10 minutes, she was gone. There was absolutely nothing more I could have done. I held her little head and just tried to comfort her the best I could. I was in utter shock. I could not believe what was happening in front of me.